The geysers in this park aren't erupting water. They're breathing. Welcome to the Wilderness Protocol. Geology is the study of a silent, sleeping world. We look at layers of rock and we read them like pages in a history book. We believe the earth beneath our feet is a thing of stone and magma, of predictable pressures and slow tectonic movements. We believe it is a stage and we are the actors upon it. This report is a correction to that belief. It is a record of a time when the stage itself began to breathe. My name is Dr. Elias Thorne. I am a geochemist. I was assigned to a remote monitoring station in Yellowstone National Park to study the unique geothermal features of the Shoshone Geyser Basin. The data I collected does not conform to any known geological model. The official report cites instrument malfunction due to extreme geothermal interference. That is a lie. The instruments were working perfectly. The geysers in that basin are not erupting water. They are exhaling. And we in our blissful ignorance have been measuring the respiration of a sleeping titan. The Shoshone Geyser Basin is one of Yellowstone's hidden gems. While the tourist hordes flock to Old Faithful, Shoshone remains largely untouched, accessible only by a long, arduous hike or by boat across Shoshone Lake. It's a place of raw primordial beauty, a landscape of bubbling mud pots, steaming fumaroles, and dozens of small, unpredictable geysers. It feels like a younger, wilder version of the Earth. I was sent there for a 6-month solo research assignment. My mission was to install and monitor a new experimental array of gas sensors. The goal was to create a more accurate model for predicting geothermal eruptions by analyzing the subtle shifts in the composition of the gases sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide that preceded an eruption. It was a dream job for a geochemist. I was being given my own private primordial laboratory. The monitoring station was a small, reinforced cabin set back about a half-mile from the main basin. It was rustic on the outside, but inside it was a high-tech nerve center, packed with monitors, servers, and my analytical equipment. For the first 2 months, my life was a peaceful, predictable routine. I would hike out to the geysers each day, collect my samples, check my sensors, and spend my evenings analyzing the data. The data was beautiful. It was a perfect symphony of geological processes. I could see the pressure building in the subterranean plumbing of a geyser. The gas concentration shifting just moments before it would burst forth in a magnificent column of steam and superheated water. I felt like a conductor, learning to read the Earth's own musical score. The first hint that the music was about to change came in my 3rd month. I was monitoring a small, particularly active geyser we had nicknamed the Watchman because of its regular, clock-like eruptions every 90 minutes. But one afternoon the pattern broke. It missed an eruption, then another. I hiked out to inspect the sensor array. The equipment was functioning perfectly, but the geyser itself was different. The cone of mineral deposits around its opening was coated in a thin, faintly iridescent, organic-looking slime that hadn't been there the day before. And the steam rising from the opening was no longer the clean, white steam of boiling water. It was tinged with a faint, sickly yellow-green, and it carried a strange, unfamiliar smell. It was not the usual rotten egg smell of sulfur. It was a smell that was both metallic and strangely organic, like decaying vegetation mixed with ozone. I took a sample of the gas and a swab of the slime and returned to my lab. The results were not just anomalous. They were biologically and chemically impossible. The gas sample contained the usual geothermal markers, but it also contained complex, long-chain organic molecules, amino acids, simple proteins, the building blocks of life, erupting from a vent connected to the magma chamber of a supervolcano. And the slime was even more baffling. Under the microscope, it was not an extremophile bacteria or an algae. It was a network of crystalline, silicon-based structures suspended in a protein-rich hydrogel. They were arranged in patterns that looked uncannily like neurons, like a piece of a nervous system. I spent a week running the tests again and again, convinced I had contaminated the samples. But the results were always the same. I was looking at a geothermal feature that was venting complex organic compounds and was surrounded by a substance that looked disturbingly like brain tissue. I didn't report it. Not yet. What would I say? That a geyser had suddenly developed a biological signature? They would pull me for a psychiatric evaluation. I needed more data. I needed to understand the system. It was then that I began to notice the rhythm. I had always thought of the geyser basin as a chaotic place, a collection of individual, unconnected features, each erupting on its own timetable. But as I analyzed the data from my new, park-wide sensor array, a new, terrifying pattern emerged. They were not unconnected. The small geysers, the bubbling mud pots, the steaming fumaroles, they were all connected. Their eruptions, their gas releases were not random. They were synchronized. The entire basin was acting as a single, massive, and complex system. And the 90-minute cycle of the Watchman was not an eruption cycle. It was an exhalation. The entire basin was breathing. A slow, deep, rhythmic inhalation as the ground pressure across the whole area subtly dropped. And then a long, 90-minute pause, followed by a slow, powerful exhalation as dozens of vents released their steam and gas in a perfectly timed sequence. I was not in a geyser basin. I was standing on the lung of some colossal, subterranean and previously dormant life form. The geysers were not geological features. They were the nostrils, the bronchial tubes, the pores of a living, breathing, planetary-scale organism. The thought was so monstrous, so utterly paradigm-shifting, that I felt a wave of vertigo so intense I had to grip the edge of my console to keep from falling. My life's work, my understanding of the planet had been a lie. I had been a flea studying the skin of a god, and had mistaken its pores for volcanoes. And then came the next, even more terrifying realization. The data showed that this rhythmic breathing pattern had only begun 3 months ago. The same time I had arrived. The same time I had installed my new powerful sensors. The same time I had begun to listen. Elias, the Tlingit guide from the Tongass report, had warned Dr. Thorne. You are making a noise that this forest is not used to. You are waking it up. I had done the same. My equipment, my constant presence, my focused, scientific attention, it had acted as an alarm clock. I had, in my blundering, scientific ignorance, woken the sleeping giant. And now it was beginning to stir. The knowledge changed everything. The world outside my cabin was no longer a beautiful, chaotic landscape of rock and water. It was the skin of a living creature. A creature that was now aware of my presence. The breathing of the basin grew deeper, more regular. The 90-minute cycle became as predictable as my own heartbeat. I stopped thinking of it as a geological event and started thinking of it as a biological one. I was no longer a geochemist. I was an xenobiologist studying a single, planet-sized life form. And the life form was changing. The iridescent, neural slime began to spread. It appeared around other vents, other geysers, connecting them in a shimmering, faintly glowing web. At night, the entire basin would pulse with a soft, internal blue-green light, the rhythmic glow matching the breathing cycle. The valley was developing a visible nervous system. The exhalations also changed. The gas composition became more and more complex. I started detecting pheromones, hormones, complex organic signals that had no place in a geothermal vent. It wasn't just breathing anymore. It was talking. It was communicating with itself, its different parts sending signals back and forth through the steam. And it was communicating with the environment. The local wildlife began to behave erratically. The elk herds, which should have been in the high country, descended into the valley, gathering near the edges of the geyser basin. They would stand there for hours motionless, their heads cocked as if listening to the steam. They were not afraid. They were reverent. But the predators, the bears, the wolves, they vanished. They fled the valley completely, as if driven away by a sound or a presence that only they could perceive. The natural order was being rewritten. I became a prisoner in my cabin. I was too terrified to hike out. The thought of walking across the skin of that living, breathing, and now thinking entity was more than I could bear. My twice-daily radio check-ins with the main ranger station became a masterclass in deception. "Everything's fine here, Henderson," I'd say, my voice a strained imitation of my former self. "The new sensors are providing some fascinating data on gas pressure fluctuations. I'm hoping to publish." I was living a lie, a lone man hoarding the most important and terrifying discovery in human history. The breaking point came a month later. It was during a particularly powerful exhalation cycle. I was watching the main monitor, which showed a live feed from a camera I had placed near the Watchman geyser. The steam that erupted was thicker than usual, a dense yellow-green cloud. As the steam began to clear, I saw that it had left something behind. Coating the rocks around the geyser vent was a new substance. It was a thick, amber-colored, translucent material. And inside it, suspended like insects in ancient amber, were things. I zoomed the camera in. My blood ran cold. They were copies. Perfect, amber-encased replicas of the local fauna. A squirrel, its tiny claws outstretched. A bluebird, its wings frozen mid-flight. A large trout, its scales shimmering. They were not fossils. They were three-dimensional snapshots, moments of life captured and preserved with impossible detail. The creature wasn't just breathing. It wasn't just talking. It was creating. It was replicating the life it was observing. I felt a sudden, profound, and irrational fear. I looked down at my own hands, at the wrinkles on my knuckles, at the scar on my thumb. Was it observing me too? Was it, at this very moment, learning my shape, my form, my biology? That night, my sleep was plagued by nightmares. I dreamt I was standing in the geyser basin, and the ground beneath me was a vast, translucent membrane. I could see the colossal, slow-moving organs of the creature below, and I could feel its thoughts not as words but as immense, slow waves of pure alien consciousness. It was dreaming, and I was a part of its dream. I woke up in a cold sweat. The rhythmic thrum of the basin's breathing was a constant, maddening presence. I had to get out. I had to warn someone. I didn't care if they thought I was mad. I began to pack a small emergency bag, my movements frantic. And then I heard a new sound. It was a soft tapping on the cabin door. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. No one ever came to the station. I was completely, utterly alone. "Hello," a voice called from outside. It was a man's voice. A friendly, cheerful voice. "Package for Dr. Thorne," the voice said. "Just need a signature." My mind reeled. A package? Here? It was impossible. I crept to the small, reinforced window next to the door and peered out. There was a man standing on my porch. He was dressed in the brown uniform of a commercial delivery driver. He was holding a small electronic clipboard and smiling a wide, friendly, reassuring smile. But everything else about him was wrong. He had no truck. There were no tracks in the dirt leading to the cabin. And his uniform, though it looked right, seemed to be shimmering slightly out of focus, as if I were looking at it through a heat haze. And then I saw his eyes. They were the brilliant, iridescent, blue-green of the neural slime that now coated the geyser basin. It was a copy, a replica. The creature had learned to replicate not just the animals, but the humans it had seen from afar, the tourists at the park's edge, the delivery drivers in the nearby towns. It was practicing. It was perfecting its craft. And it was trying to get in. "Just a signature, Doc," the delivery man said, his smile never faltering. "Standard protocol." Protocol. The word was a slap in the face. It was using my own language, my own world of rules and procedures against me. I backed away from the door. "Go away," I whispered, my voice a dry croak. The delivery man's smile widened. "No can do," he said, his cheerful tone unchanging. "The package is perishable. It's addressed to you. A sample. From the new acquisition." He turned the clipboard around. Taped to the back was a small, clear plastic bag. And inside it, floating in a small amount of the amber-colored preservative, was a single human blue eye. My eye! I screamed. A raw, guttural, mindless sound of pure terror. The delivery man laughed, a sound that was not human, but the sound of steam hissing through 1,000 tiny fissures in the rock. "We have your pattern now, Dr. Thorne," it said, its voice dissolving into that chorus of hissing. "The copy is almost complete." It raised a hand and knocked on the door again, this time with the force that shook the entire cabin. The knocking did not stop. It just continued, a steady, powerful, and patient rhythm that was perfectly in sync with the breathing of the earth beneath my feet. The knocking was a metronome, counting down the last moments of my sanity. It was the sound of the world ending, not with a bang, but with a polite, insistent, and monstrous request to be let in. I scrambled to the back of the cabin, my mind a vortex of terror. The thing outside was wearing a human face, but I knew it was just a mask, a convenient interface. The real creature was the valley itself. The ground I stood on. The air I breathed. There was no escape. But as I looked at the array of monitors displaying the data from the basin, a desperate, insane idea began to form. It was a plan born not of logic, but of a biologist's understanding of systems. Every living organism has a weakness. Every system has a point of failure. The creature I was studying was a chemosynthetic life form. It lived on the unique cocktail of gases and minerals provided by the geothermal vents. Its breathing, its very life, depended on the delicate balance of the Earth's internal chemistry. What if I could change that chemistry? What if I could poison the air it breathed? I had been sent here with a dozen canisters of tracer gas. It was a harmless, inert xenon compound that we used to track the flow of steam and gas through the subterranean plumbing of the geyser system. But I also had something else. In a locked, reinforced case for emergency use only, were 2 canisters of pure, concentrated, and highly reactive oxygen. It was meant for my own survival, in case a sudden release of carbon dioxide from a fumarole displaced the breathable air in the valley. Mixing pure oxygen with the hydrogen sulfide and methane-rich geothermal gases was a recipe for catastrophic, explosive combustion. It was a suicide mission. I would be at the epicenter of the blast. But it was better than the alternative. Better than being a permanent, smiling exhibit in the creature's amber museum. The knocking on the door grew louder, more insistent. I could hear the wood splintering. I didn't have much time. I grabbed the 2 oxygen canisters and my pack. I didn't go for the door. I went for the floor. In the center of the cabin was a small, steel maintenance hatch that led to the utility conduit that housed the wiring for my sensors. The conduit ran from the cabin all the way out to the Watchman geyser. It was a tight, dark, and dangerous crawl space. It was my only way out. I wrenched the hatch open, the sound of the knocking a deafening thunder behind me. I dropped the canisters in my pack into the dark hole, and then I squeezed in after them, pulling the hatch shut just as the cabin door splintered and burst inwards. The conduit was a claustrophobic nightmare. It was a 3-foot-wide metal tube, filled with wires in a terrifying, echoing darkness. I began to crawl, pushing the heavy canisters in front of me. The sound of the creature, now inside my cabin, was a muffled, furious roar above me. It took me what felt like an eternity to crawl the half-mile to the geyser. I could feel the rhythmic thrum of the Earth's breathing all around me, a slow, powerful heartbeat. I was inside the creature's very veins. I finally reached the small underground chamber directly beneath the Watchman geyser vent. The air here was hot, thick with the smell of sulfur and the strange, organic metallic scent of the creature itself. I worked quickly, my hands slick with sweat. I attached the regulators to the oxygen canisters. The plan was simple and insane. I would wait for the inhalation cycle, for the moment when the ground pressure dropped and the geyser was drawing air in. Then I would release the pure oxygen directly into the vent, into the lungs of the beast. The oxygen would mix with the volatile geothermal gases in the subterranean chambers. And then when the 90-minute cycle was complete, when the creature exhaled the superheated steam and rock would act as the ignition source. I sat in the dark, my back against the cold metal wall of the conduit, and I waited. I watched the pressure readings on my handheld monitor. The 90-minute exhalation cycle was coming to an end. The pressure began to drop. The inhalation was beginning. Now! I opened the valves on both canisters. A loud, violent hiss filled the small chamber as the pure, reactive oxygen flooded into the geyser's plumbing. And I began to crawl as fast as my bruised and screaming body would allow back the way I came. I was maybe halfway back to the cabin when the inhalation cycle ended. I felt the pressure shift. I felt the deep, slow, and final gathering of energy for the exhalation. I felt the earth beneath me take its last, deep, poison breath. The explosion was not a sound. It was a concussion. A wave of pure force that ripped through the ground, that buckled the metal conduit around me, that threw me against the walls like a rag doll. The world became a vortex of noise and heat, and a brilliant, searing white light. And then nothing. I woke up to the sound of helicopter rotors. I was lying on the ground, outside, on the scorched and blackened earth of what had once been my cabin. The station was gone. The entire plateau was a smoking, blackened crater. The men who found me were the ones in the gray suits. The custodians. The ones who show up when the protocol has been so thoroughly broken that a new one has to be written. They told me I was a hero. They told me I had averted a geological catastrophe, that my quick thinking had prevented a massive, explosive eruption that could have threatened the entire park. They told me my instruments had detected a dangerously unstable gas mixture, and that I had heroically initiated a controlled burn. It was a good story. A logical story. A story that could be filed away. I was debriefed for weeks. I told them everything. About the slime, about the breathing, about the amber replicas, about the delivery man with the glowing eyes. They listened patiently. They took notes. And then they told me I was suffering from severe trauma and hypoxia-induced hallucinations. They showed me satellite photos of the Shoshone Basin taken after the incident. It was a dead, sterile, blackened landscape. The geysers were gone. The vents were sealed with molten rock. It's over, the gray man told me. The anomaly has been neutralized. Your actions were successful. But I know he was lying. Because I was not the only thing that was taken from that valley. They took my research, my data, my samples. They took every piece of evidence that the creature had ever existed. They were not neutralizing it. They were classifying it. They were continuing the study. I live a quiet life now. I hold a tenured position at a university. A reward for my heroism. I teach geology to bright-eyed students who believe, as I once did, that the world beneath their feet is a predictable sleeping thing. But I know the truth. I know that the earth is not a dead ball of rock. It is a living, breathing organism, full of ancient and utterly alien life. We are just a thin, temporary skin on its surface. And I know that what I did in that valley was not a solution. It was a wound. I did not kill the creature. I only hurt it. I only made it angry. And I know with a certainty that haunts my every waking moment, that the earth is a patient thing. It has healed from worse wounds than the one I gave it. And someday, somewhere in another deep, quiet, geothermal basin, a young scientist will notice an anomaly in the steam. They will see a strange organic slime on the rocks. They will detect impossible molecules in the air. And they will hear the earth beneath their feet take its first, slow, waking breath. Thank you for the completion of this geological report from the Wilderness Protocol. We believe we walk on solid ground, but the world is more alive and more alien than we can possibly imagine. The deepest protocols are not for our interactions with the wilderness, but for our interactions with the planet itself. If this data has been valuable, please consider liking this video and subscribing for further reports from the thin places of the world. Remember that every geothermal vent is a window into the planet's heart. Be careful what you see looking back.